Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. We've been talking for the last 4 or 5 weeks. About 5 weeks ago, I was really led from within to get away from the termites stuff and listen to Joel's talks on living between two worlds. And so I did that, and I've been sort of listening to one of those tapes each week as sort of the inspiration for whatever's going on here, because that's clearly the work we're doing, is living between two worlds. And I was sort of delighted to discover Dulcie's having her retreat this end of this month, but then she's having a women's retreat towards the end of May. And since it's a women's retreat, I didn't read it or anything, but I happened to notice yesterday afternoon that the title of the women's retreat is Living Between Two Worlds. And so I called her just to let her know that we're both in sync, which we always are, she and I, and that we're listening to the same thing. And she said, oh yeah, about 4 or 5 weeks ago I got led to the Living Between Two Worlds book. And so clearly that's the work that we're supposed to be doing. And it is the work that we're all doing. Everyone who's consciously on the spiritual path is living between two worlds. And it's a process of sometimes having your head in the clouds and sometimes having your feet in the mud. And it's, well, we talked last week about identifying with the correct eye. It's all about developing the practice of living constantly in the big eye, constantly being aware of the big eye, that consciousness, which is your individual consciousness, which is an expression of God, rather than identifying with the little I, which is this material body with its ego and all its desires and wants and everything. And then I was listening to a Robert CD last night, and he starts right out by saying, it's very close to a quote, it was really a paraphrase, but very close. He says, if you believe you have a body and a mind, you believe you have problems. And I checked the name of the tape, and there's the name of the CD, and it's called Identifying with the Body. So he's talking about the same thing, living between two worlds. And identifying with the body, identifying with the mind, is to have problems. And identifying with the big I is to not have problems. When I am aware of my oneness with God, I am also aware of my oneness with everything. If I'm truly experiencing my oneness with God, I will also be experiencing my oneness with every other spiritual being. And every being is a spiritual being. So I will be experiencing my oneness with all the other human beings and all the animals and all the vegetables and all the minerals. I will be experiencing my oneness with you and with a block of granite and with a cockroach. When you are experiencing your oneness with God, you are not locked into this material appearance. And the granite, the hard granite, is the material appearance. And the cockroach is a material appearance. And the tree is a material appearance. And the people are a material appearance. But they're all material appearances of the spiritual being that we call God, of consciousness. They are all an expression in consciousness, an appearance within consciousness, made of consciousness. So, to be aware of my oneness with God, aware, not thinking about it, but aware of my oneness with God, means that I'm aware of my oneness with everything. And conversely, if I'm not aware of my oneness with you, I'm not in my spiritual consciousness. I'm not aware of my oneness with God. I may be thinking about it, but if I'm not experiencing my oneness with you, then I'm not experiencing my oneness with God, because there's no difference. God is consciousness expressed as me and as you, and so if I'm experiencing a separation from you, I'm experiencing a separation from God, because you and God are identical. God is you and me and the cockroach. Or do you prefer worms? Any preferences, ladies? Yeah, it's all one. It's all God. In the material sense, I have limitations. I'm finite in size, and I have limitations in my physical abilities, and I have limitations in my smartness, and I have limitations in my education, and I have limitations in my exposure to various things, and I have limitation in my material possessions, and I have limitation in my everything. Being material is to experience my individuality and my separateness, and to be limited in every respect, and essentially to be limited to my own resources and my own ability to gather resources. In other words, when my wallet's empty, I'm out of money, and now it's up to me to find a way to get more money and put it in my wallet. And if I get asked a question about Einstein's theory of relativity, I either know the answer or I don't. But I'm limited by my education. I can't take a job as a physics teacher because I don't have enough knowledge about physics, and I can't take a job as a flower arranger because I don't have any artistic talents, and there's all sorts of things I can't do because I'm so limited by my own upbringing and conditioning. On the other hand, if I am aware of my oneness with God, then I'm aware of my oneness with everything. And in that consciousness, there are no limitations, since God is limitless. There is no, God is omniscient, God knows everything. God must understand the theory of relativity perfectly, since God as Einstein expounded it, and God as a lot of bright physicists since then have been expanding it and working with it. And, so, since I am an expression of God, and since God doesn't divide itself up and give Lee the website, the designing part of itself, and give Einstein the theory of relativity part of itself, God doesn't divide itself up. Remember that we talked earlier about the fact that in spirituality things multiply, they don't divide, they don't subtract. So all of God is in you, and is in me, and is in Einstein. And so access to all of that is available if I'm in spiritual consciousness, not material consciousness. And the same is true for what appear to be material limitations. There are no mental limitations. There are also no material limitations. In the material world, when I spend the money in my wallet, I'm out of money. But in the spiritual world, when I finish giving out, expressing the last dollar bill, the last expression of God as a dollar bill, then knowing that that money was an expression of God as money, as supply for me, more money will be there when I need that. So I don't have to immediately become concerned with going out, Lee going out and getting more money. The money that was in my wallet, it was not money in my wallet, it was an expression of God. It was an expression of divine grace. Let's use the word divine grace. And divine grace is omnipresent, so my supply will continue to be met as long as I maintain that consciousness. So, with one foot in each world, if I think I have a problem, the one approach would be to figure out what I'm going to do about this. And that's a very human approach and very limiting. And what I do about it will be limited to my own personal resources. The alternative is, if I have the appearance of a problem, to go within and realize my oneness with God, and therefore my oneness with all of you and with everything, and be silent and wait until I see what I am led to do. Rather than deciding what I'm going to do about this, I see where the God consciousness that I am one with leads me to go. And, that will solve the problem. It will not so much solve the problem as dissolve the problem, annihilate the problem, eliminate the problem. In the presence of God consciousness, disharmony cannot exist. So what appeared to be a problem no longer appears to be a problem. And when that outpictures in this world, it often outpictures in what we would call a solution. So this is like the next step in our track of living between two worlds, not only do we want to, like we talked about last week, focus on trying to remember that we're the big I rather than the little I, and worry about to resolve practice until we no longer are misidentified a lot, but we also can practice remembering the omnipresence of divine grace and developing the habit, the practice of relying on divine grace to meet all of our needs, dilemmas, problems, whatever you want to call them, rather than trying to undertake the solution with our own human limited resources. A whole different approach. And actually, to the extent that we can develop the practice of relying on divine grace to meet our needs, to that extent will it be demonstrated in our experience. And that demonstration is what will lift us further out of the mud into the clouds. Okay? So we need to, those of us who are truly greedy and want to get ahead fast, need to develop the habit of practicing that and relying on that whenever we can. If you're afraid, take care of yourself. But if you feel like here is a place where I can risk sitting back and relying on God rather than putting out this fire, that would be the wise thing to do. So if you have a body and a mind, then you are in human consciousness. And then you are limited to your own personal resources. And then you are at the mercy of human consciousness and the duality and the opposites and the statistics and all of that. And you will have problems, or you will have what you call problems, what appear to be problems, as duality buffets you. If you can learn to let the appearance of a problem remind you that you're in human consciousness, and trigger you to reach for your God consciousness, that would be a tremendous solution to problems, a tremendous way to deal with problems, and a tremendous way to develop the extent of your God consciousness. Let's see. We need to say anything else. Do questions, comments, anything? Open it up, do a workshop.
I have a question.
Sure.
My question is, what is a spiritual healer?
Is a certain
Spiritual healer.
healer. If if I see in my human consciousness a physical disease, and I recognize what we were just talking about and say, well, I see disharmony, I see a physical disease, I see a human problem, but I'm going to work towards God consciousness and try to get a resolution that way. Then what I might do initially is reach out to someone who is a spiritual healer, someone who is a practitioner, and ask that person for help. In reaching out to that person, I am aligning my consciousness with his or hers. Now that person, being in God consciousness, presumably, since they're a practitioner, will have the experience that in the presence of God consciousness there can be no disharmony. So that person will not, in that person's consciousness there cannot be the disharmony of the disease. So in his consciousness he knows there is no disease, and the appearance will change to conform to that practitioner's consciousness. And if the person who is experiencing the disease has aligned their consciousness with the practitioner's consciousness, if you have one your consciousness with the practitioner's consciousness, you will in fact experience the result of the practitioner's higher consciousness, and the disease will disappear. This is exactly what Joel did 135 times a day for 10 years. And like 85% of the people who called him for help for anything from cancer to a cold were healed. The problem disappeared, as is reported so much of Jesus healing people. The cripple by the side of the road, thinks he has a problem because he thinks he's material and can have a problem. And Jesus looks at him and says, "What's hindering you? Pick up your mat and go." And because Jesus realizes that all is there is God expressing himself as that, and there can't possibly be any disharmony there, and there can't possibly be any limitations, and he knows that so clearly that the cripple lying by the road was lifted by that and picked up his mat and walked. So that's the sort of thing. Jesus raising the dead was the same thing. Joel had phenomenal healings. Cancer and tuberculosis and withered arms and kids born without arms and on and on. Just an awesome list of apparent physical problems that just were resolved by exposure to his consciousness. So that's what spiritual healing is.
Without the person who is believing that they have this disease because they're of the body, without them aligning their consciousness with yours, can a healing take place?
It can.
Could I ask you to heal someone other than myself?
Only if they're under your consciousness, really. You could for your child who is under your consciousness until they're 12 or 14.
A parent.
No, they're not under your consciousness, and they're on their own thing.
It happened in the Bible.
It could, sure.
He said, "Heal my guard," and Jesus said, "Bring him to me." He goes, "No, if you just heal my guard, he'll be healed." Regardless of it.
Sure, it can happen. Jesus was an exceptionally powerful healer. In fact, the person could heal themselves if they had the consciousness.
But my mom doesn't have that, so that's why I'm asking. Is another avenue?
Mm-hmm. The other thing is that with spiritual healing, spiritual healing fails sometimes, even with the high consciousness. If the person is sufficiently rigid in their thinking, they're not going to be healed, or if they're invested in their disease, they're probably not going to be healed even if they ask themselves, because they don't really want it.
What does invested mean?
In the sense I was using it, it means they have something at stake in being sick. Like if the sickness is a resistance behavior, it's going to be more difficult to resolve it than if it's the casual flu that's going around because the whole community thinks that everybody's got the flu right now. You know, when the community thinks there's flu going around, then those of us who are not in any consciousness other than human consciousness, 40% of us or 70% of us or whatever the appropriate statistic is are going to catch flu. But if your resistance behavior is such that you are very interested in hypochondria and being sick and such like, the chances are that and those people who have flu as casually as that are probably pretty easy to heal. But people who have an investment in the disease, if there's a payoff in the disease and such like, they're not likely to let it go, and they can cling to it for as long and hard as they want to.
Some of the tapes are somewhat scratchy, so I have a little trouble understanding them, but I thought I heard Robert say that he had nothing better to do. Was he sick? See, I don't know much about him.
Then what?
And be sick.
Robert never said that he was sick.
I thought somebody had asked him. That's why I said the tapes are kind of scratchy, so I couldn't really hear the question, but it sounded like he was, well, he sounded very old.
Well, you're speculating about Robert.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know anything about him.
Yeah.
So he wasn't sick.
Robert didn't even have a body. From Robert's viewpoint, Robert didn't have a body. So that's why he could not have said that he was sick and had nothing better to do.
No, someone else said that he was sick, and he just sounded nothing better to do.
No. In fact, his body exhibited the symptoms of Parkinson's disease.
Well, maybe that's what they were referring to.
But Robert was very clear that he did not have Parkinson's disease. Just like Ramana Maharshi was very clear that he did not have cancer. In spite of the fact that the disciples and the devotees and the people flocked around and thought he did. Because they were identified with their own bodies and looking at his body, and he was in no way identified with the body at all. That was just another body over there. Might as well have been a cockroach.
Now that makes sense to me on that one plane, but when you're talking about living between two worlds and healing, then I'm confused.
Why would Robert? I mean, I don't know I don't understand what's confusing.
Why would Robert bother to heal that body when he doesn't have a body?
Precisely.
And that, makes perfect sense to him. But to the disciple sitting in the room and looking at this body, having the appearance of that.
So that's a growth opportunity for the disciple.
Then why bother with the healing?
Nobody was healing Robert.
No, nobody was healing him, but I thought we were just discussing like spiritual healing.
Yeah, but Robert did not go to the practitioner to get a healing.
But was he a spiritual healer?
No, he didn't heal, and he didn't get healing, and he made he wasn't associated with spiritual healing at all. Now, I was talking about Joel Goldsmith, who was very much a spiritual healer. Joel. That was his first gift. The first thing he realized about the whole thing was this, this miraculous ability, this Jesus-like ability to heal, manifested itself in him. See, he didn't have any choice about that, and that was not Robert's experience. While Joel was manifesting this Christ-like ability to heal, Robert was dissolving into the universe permanently. So Joel was still here. Joel was living between two worlds the whole time that he was wearing that body, and Robert was not living between two worlds. He was out of here. His body was here, but he was out of here the whole time.
And that's what you're saying about the other person who had cancer.
Yeah, and Ramana Maharshi was the same way. Ramana Maharshi became enlightened when he was 16, and he died of cancer to the mortal, and so did Ramakrishna, and a lot of these really high holy guys died of cancer or something. It seems like. But
That's the body.
Huh?
The body.
The body did, yeah. Yeah.
So when they're done with the body, it's just...
Sure, yeah, it's got to go one way or another. And he had no more use for it.
Just like a
Teaching was
channel.
done. It was a good way, a teaching device as much as anything. Just part of the Leelaa. That's the way the play was written.
And did Jesus' body been the same way then?
Well, Jesus didn't die of cancer. He died of hanging from a cross, they say. And,
Asphyxiation.
yeah, died of asphyxiation from hanging from a cross. But I think there's no question that he didn't have to if he didn't want to. We also hear a lot about Jesus' ability to disappear into the crowd and stuff like that. So Jesus submitted himself to that. And we also hear about Jesus being around 3 days later, although he was not wearing a body, but there he was in spirit, And I happen to know Robert was around after his body was dead. And
Isn't everybody?
huh?
Isn't everybody then?
Oh yeah, sure. It's just whether you know it or not. Dean Karoli Baba was about to die, and they were saying, "Don't leave us." And Dean Karoli Baba says, "Where would I go?" There's the consciousness, Since I am everything, where would I go? Don't be silly. Shake up your consciousness. Where would I go? And he laughed, And that's exactly what Ramana's response would have been. Robert's response was, don't be silly. Nobody dies. Joel's response is, nobody dies. So that's what spiritual healing is.
Lee, many times I've heard you say, and Robert say, that we are not the doer, and the body will do whatever it came here to do, and you basically don't have any control over it or business with it or anything. Is that a way of being in two worlds? Because the body is here doing its thing, and if you're in the consciousness some of the time, you can watch your body and not be the doer, but then you fly back in and all of a sudden you're the doer again.
Yeah.
Is that kind of do you ever get to know why your body is doing what it's doing? In other words, for example, what you're doing, you feel like, or what I've heard you say is, all is well, everything is unfolding exactly the way it's supposed to. So obviously, you're doing the unfoldment. And I'm doing my unfoldment. But sometimes you're not here for that.
I'm unfolding. I'm not doing my unfoldment. Get your eyes straight. When Lee is not doing Lee's unfoldment. Okay? But Lee is unfolding the way he should. And Donna is not doing her unfoldment, but Donna is unfolding the way she should. Now that's true whether I happen to be identified with the capital S self or whether I happen to be identified with Lee. It's irrelevant where I'm identified with. The truth is still the truth. So now what's the question? Sometimes Lee is confused and thinks he's making decisions and doing things.
Right.
That's what Robert's talking about when he says, I'm not the doer. Robert never is confused and thinks that he's that body and making those decisions and in charge of them. When Lee thinks he has a body and is making decisions about what to do, then he thinks he's the doer. But so, he's still not.
Well, when this class came about, so to speak, Lee was unfolding, and you didn't feel like you had any choice, so to speak. In other words, you went to the class and listened to the tape and then decided that you didn't decide, though. It just, and you never felt like you were deciding.
No.
Okay, so I guess that I haven't reached that place yet where I can look at myself as the doer and not be doing. And I'm not looking at myself. Doer is just doing. I'm not there.
Yeah.
But I know you are. It's weird because I know you are.
Yeah.
So it's nice to watch you not doing that.
Lee has been speculating about this class since last August. He thought it was going to happen in September and kept waiting to see if it would, and it didn't. And then finally, as a result of going to a different class, he was led to start this and thought it was going to be going through the Termites book. And after 2 weeks of that, the living between two worlds stuff started. And as I was saying to Simone when she first got here, to tell you how confused I am, Lee has right now, maybe some of you are here, Lee has right now two totally conflicting senses. One is that this Between Two Worlds series is over, essentially, and the other is that last week's class was, there was as much presence here last week as there's ever been here. So, it feels like the teaching is really high and dynamic, but yet it also feels like it's winding down and not going anywhere. And Lee has all that shit going on. And that's all absolutely irrelevant. Because Lee could absolutely decide not to teach another class right now, and the class might happen next week. Or he could decide that we will have 10 of us here, however many there are, let's have a class next week, and then it get canceled, or decide not to, or, I don't have any idea what's going on here.
Well, this kind of is like predetermination or destination or whatever D word you want to use. But the way I see everything is unfolding exactly as it should is that I am watching things unfold from without or from externally. And everything is unfolding, and then one second I'm sitting in one room, immediately it's like this, I'm sitting in like another room. And that's the unfolding. Because I have a picture in my house, and I have some t-shirts, and there's a white cardboard that you fold the t-shirt around, when you get a new t-shirt, and it's just white, and I put that on my wall, and that's the truth, is there's nothing. I've been taught nothing for years and years and years. So there's really nothing to unfold. But then when I'm watching the predetermination of my body, that's what's unfolding. It's what my body is experiencing. So, and then I participate in that a lot. Mm-hmm. And that's why I get depressed all the time. Mm-hmm. Because I find it a fact that I'm separate from God, and that I am part of the unfoldment, and there's actually something happening.
Yeah. And you're misidentified.
Right, which is like 99% of the time. So, but there are those 1% when I'm clear that I'm over there and this is just occurring.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's just, one thing I wonder is...
So the goal should be to work on making that 1% 2%.
Right.
And I'll be right back. But that's the thing to do, is to expand that 1% to 2%, and then to 3, and...
Right. And then it gets all good, and then something happens. Did you have your start date? Show up? Another thing with Robert's, things, I think someone was talking about the other people and they're asking them things. There's one guy in there that is just going to figure it out. He's just, and I'm not going to say his name, but he's just like, okay, wait a minute, but you said this last week, so that means this, so therefore, now I'm right, and now I'm human, and now I can go around and it does work not work. I love it because nothing exists. And he's buying into the fact that he is material. I love listening to that guy. So,
When Robert says, I am not the doer, what he means is that he is not identified with any decision-making process or deterministic thing that has to do with that body that we call Robert. Okay? That's what it really is. At least that's what it means to me when he said that. And that's what I mean when I say I'm not the doer. It means that I'm not identifying with the one who is determining Lee's path.
right.
And if I am caught up in Lee and think I need to make decisions and determine, in that period of time I am the doer. I think I'm the doer. Still I'm not. But I think I'm the doer if I think that I'm making decisions that will that are determining Lee's path or Lee's unfoldment. And the everything is unfolding exactly as it should statement means that Lee is going on exactly the perfect path for Lee's spiritual unfoldment, regardless of whether or not Lee thinks he has anything to do with determining his path. Because what he thinks doesn't have any relevance to the unfoldment of the path.
The experience I was having today was recently. I keep identifying myself with what's going on, what I'm doing, and mostly it's all really good. And then suddenly a thought will occur to me that I'm not as fulfilled as I wish I was. And then I start feeling bad. And then I realize that I'm identifying with the divine mind. And I run to my notes from last class. And I start reading them to try and get rightly identified again.
Yeah, that's the game. That's the drill.
The 2%.
Yeah, that's going for 2% instead of 1%, or 12 instead of 10, or whatever. I mean, it's a drill.
If you're unfolding as you should, what's that work involved?
That's part of the unfoldment. That's not a choice either. If it feels like work, then the way it's supposed to unfold is it's supposed to feel like work. If it doesn't feel like work, then the way it's unfolding is that it doesn't feel like work. the quickest way out of that is the, if you realize that you're identifying with the little I,
Right.
ask yourself who is identifying with the little I.
I was doing self-inquiry real regularly for quite a while, and now it just seems to not be happening for me at all.
Okay.
What I wrote down 2 weeks ago was become disinterested in Joanne. And that's been helping.
I'm sorry, you wrote down what?
Become disinterested in Joanne. You know how you'll be sitting at some class or meeting and somebody's going on and on about themselves, and you're just like, who the fuck cares? Like, you don't care. Or I don't care. And the problem is, so the problem is when I'm going on and on about me and whatever my problem is, I care, right? And to the degree that I don't care, that I don't think it's interesting and that's enough to think about or talk about, I'm out of it, right?
That's right.
So what I become aware that I'm interested in it, and this is sustaining it.
Yeah. And again, the quick way is who's interested in it.
Who's interested in it?
You can just always drop back to that. Yeah. Who's interested in it?
Well,
The other way, and the other way, is to a few years ago, it was given to me to sort of use "Be still and know that I am God" as a mantra. And the way that worked for me is that when I would say that, the "Peace be still and know that I am God" is quite a different place. The words are coming from quite a different place than any place that the ego I, Lee, can claim to be, okay? Because it is not the ego I, Lee, that's saying, "Peace be still and know that I am God." He's real clear he isn't, okay? So by saying that, I automatically am lifted to a point outside of Lee, because it does say I am God. The only I there is, the I that is the universal conscious, that is the individual consciousness. The only I that isn't I am is the ego Lee. So I found doing that lifted me right out of the little I. And then that reduced to just the mantra I am. So that if I'm in little Lee thinking about this or that, and I can stop just for a second and drop back to I am. Just inhale, say I, exhale, say am. And just think of I am, knowing it's that I am. The I am as in peace be still and know that I am God. That I am, all caps. That pulls you, after you've done it for regularly, lots of times, pulls you immediately into the higher consciousness. But then I had the same experience with self-inquiry. I did self-inquiry so many times, so frequently, that I got to where I would just say who, and everything stopped. Because I had been down the path so often and watched the little I dissolve and become nothing, that when I said who, the nothing fell. So any of those approaches work, but the thing that they had in common was that I did them so many times that they started working. And they did not work the first time. I repeated the self-inquiry. Thought after thought after thought. Every time for the hour and a half or 2 hours it took me to drive to Robertson back and to the satsang and back, and every time I was driving somewhere I would just do that the whole way there and back. And I started doing the peace be still and know that I am God as a preparation for meditation. Just because I was led to do that, and very quickly, because I was using that to lead me into meditation, very quickly, just saying peace be still would drop me into meditation, okay? Because they got associated. So finding some tool like that was useful to me. And almost anything like, my point is almost anything like that works. Peace be still, or I am, or who, or, any of those work. And you have to use them enough that they work more and more the more you use them.
I did some kid work this morning. Basically, I'm messed up right now. And so it was just...
Misidentification.
Right, but it was just help me. Well, right.
Who's messed up?
Not big guy.
Yeah.
Little guy is always messed up, apparently.
Yeah.
But, and insane. And so it was like, have you guys stay with me today, and then help me, help me find peace. And the more that, and then it was like just peaceful immediately, because I realized, because, with the kid, like in my meditations, the kids, there's a time when they just disappear, they didn't even exist. But it's kind of like, you're saying, kind of like this class, because some of these classes, I like sitting in it until they peter out, and there's like 3 of us sitting around going, okay, guess next year we'll do something. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of how the birth of tonight was like, we went through a lot of, whoa, it's like a roller coaster until we can get into context to where everyone kind of at least understands. I understand what everyone's saying. But there was times when I was in here going, I don't know what's going on. And then it was just, I feel that the spiritual growth of termites, I still personally think this is termites, but it's my truth. But, I don't know what the hell I call it, doesn't make sense.
That doesn't matter at all.
Right, exactly. So that is, my kid, I'm so nuts right now that the kid work is all that I have. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why does it come back? And why do some people get this so quick? And I seem to have to like when I get a cold, I'm like, I shouldn't get a cold. I'm a spiritual giant, and why am I getting a freaking NyQuil? This isn't fair. Knowledge gets me nowhere.
That's true. No your questions about why me, Lord, get you anywhere. Who knows who's getting things quicker than anybody else? I mean, Robert got completely enlightened in 14 years. But then again, maybe he got a little further in his last lifetime than I did.
Yeah, that's what I...
So you have no idea how long, those people who are getting it quickly, you have no idea how long they've been working on that particular thing.
But only the ego cares about it in that anyways.
That's right. Certainly.
So you've been talking about it is like making the ego bigger. Or pain work, focusing on it more.
Or more painful.
Any comparisons or judgments or assessments or evaluations. It's all ego bullshit.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's so true. And that's another thing. One time I asked you, do I have to live every type of personality? And your answer was like classic, I don't know, who cares? But and it was like when I was trying to find the Christ inside of the homeless man on the beach. That smelled really horrible. I knew the Christ was within him somewhere, but until I could experience it, which I did, it just wasn't true. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, I met this guy was like this great looking, he looked like a cartoon character in a Ferrari. And he's like this good looking guy, and I'm like, okay, now I gotta see the Christ in this guy who's like in a Ferrari, and then this homeless guy. And I thought, well, do I have to be like in a Ferrari in my life and then be this homeless guy in life?
Now, all you have to do is see the Christ in yourself And you will see it in everybody and you'll be done with this. Or you can go through 6 billion one at a time.
Right.
You know, pays your money and takes your choice. Go from person to person and see the Christ in him. You know, 6 billion is a lot of people. And if you see the Christ in yourself, you are in that moment seeing it in everybody. And if you are not seeing it in everybody, you are not seeing it in yourself. You're not yet there.
By seeing, it's about having the experience of, not the mental thought of.
Right. That's what I mean, the experiencing of it. If you're experiencing your oneness with God, which is what seeing the Christ means, if you are experiencing your oneness with God, then you are experiencing your oneness with everyone and everything. And it's even better than getting the 6 billion because you're experiencing your oneness with every individual consciousness that is now or ever was or ever will be. Because time also doesn't exist outside of this immediate context. So you can write a Upanishad or write a Mozart concerto or speak the language of the Tower of Babel or be shown.
How come this seems more Christian than church?
Well, the quick answer to that is because my Christ consciousness is probably clearer than the Christ consciousness of the preacher at church. Olive Joel is far more Christian than any Orthodox Christian church or Catholic church. Joel understands very clearly Christ's method. My consciousness is very Christian or Buddhist, depending on which word you want to use. They're identical.
Right. You're the most Christian man I've ever met. And I'm alive.
So experiencing my oneness with God doesn't necessarily mean that I won't. My body's going to be doing whatever my body's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But on some level, there's this mentally abiding in truth and practicing and abiding in this state of kind of meditation where I'm rightly identifying despite whatever my body's doing.
Yeah, this is what Jesus is talking about, being in the world but not of it. If you're aware of your reality as a spiritual being, and this is the state that Robert was in permanently, then you are aware always that your body is just an appearance in consciousness. It's like being at the movie and being aware that you're watching lights on a screen and there's nothing moving. Okay? I was doing that the other day watching the basketball game, and I was sitting here just locked in on the fact that I was, if you look at it one way, there's basketball players running up and down the court. But if you look at it another way, well, this spot's blue, and if you look at any spot on your television, now it's black, now it's yellow, now it's green, and other people are telling me that a guy in a yellow uniform ran past, but I'm seeing a spot go from black to yellow, and then back to black, okay? You see? Okay? Now, I was not of the basketball game, is what I'm saying, okay? So in the same way, if you are aware of the fact that you're a spiritual being, then you're seeing this material world as a dream, and the dream is another. That's why we did those first two classes, so I could talk about movies and dreams. But it's like in a dream. If you're having a dream and you're aware that you're dreaming, you're not nearly as concerned about what's going on in the dream.
Right.
Oh, I'm losing my leg. Oh well,
Right.
it'll be fine when I wake up, so it's more like that. Robert never thought he was his body.
Always, 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 always having an awareness about your spiritual reality.
That's a rare state.
Good.
Yeah. No, when you're enlightened, then it happens. But until you have that moment of clarity and you become permanently, totally enlightened, then you're going to bounce back and forth. And we're talking about how much time you spend where and how deeply you get immersed. The other thing is you can be, 95% thinking you're Joanne, but relatively disinterested in Joanne. And it's a whole different experience than 5 years ago when you were 95% thinking you were Joanne and vitally interested in Joanne's well-being. Now if you think you're the doer and you're grateful that you've learned to drop your desires and be disinterested and be more interested in other people, that's a sign that your spiritual consciousness has grown and now you're interested in taking care of them and you're sponsoring people instead of being self-obsessed, and all this stuff has changed. And you still mostly have the sense that you're the doer, but still you've grown a lot spiritually and your experience is a lot better, okay? And it's not like we're deeply identified and invested and then all of a sudden totally free. It's like, my experience is one of growing more and more disinterested in Lee over the years, okay? And the interest is waning and waning and waning, it's almost gone. I'm just absolutely disinterested in Lee. And it's weird because Lee got some weights, because Lee was concerned that Lee was getting weak, because I picked up a sack the other day and it felt really heavy, and I found out how heavy it was and it wasn't very heavy. I said, whoa, and lose them or use them or lose them, right? So I got some weights. But, so Lee is taking care of himself. But I'm not interested in that. I could care less about that.
Your body. Your body is doing.
The Lee is,
Right.
Lee is taking care of itself, apparently, What I would say, looking at that, is that, it looks like he's supposed to be here and do something for a while, because, the steps are being taken to maintain physical strength. But maybe it's for no reason at all. Maybe so that I'll look good when I get hit by a car tomorrow.
No, I understand with the body. I was speaking with some people about, we're talking about diets, and I was going, I was just saying your body knows what it needs, because one day, I was on this protein diet, and my mom took me to super salads, and I ate like 2 huge salads. So my body said, greens, I need greens, you've been denying me it, so I'm going to take it now. So, but they didn't get the concept I was coming from. So then my body also feels, at times, I need to work, I need to go for a walk, or I need to ride my bicycle, or I need to lift some weights.
Sure.
And then I become egomaniac, and I say I need to be huge, my abs need to show. So that fine line in between that, is that between two worlds? I mean, whatever the topic is.
You just drop from your body taking care of itself to being a kid.
Right.
You got to identify.
So when you're saying living between two worlds, is that what you're talking about?
Sure, yeah. Sometimes one time you're watching your body taking care of itself, and the next time you're into having rock hard abs, and that means that you re-identified with the body. Instead of witnessing the body, you're now think it's you.
Right.
The kid wants to lift it. That's all.
Oh, so living between two worlds is split?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
Vacillating?
it has two aspects to it. One is flipping back and forth, now your head's in the cloud, now your feet's in the mud, and the other is the gradual process of disassociating with the material and becoming more associated with the spiritual. Both aspects seem to happen, gradually we're becoming more aware of our of the fact that we're a spiritual being. and becoming less and less interested in the material being. And we also have moments in which we're clearly totally in Christ consciousness, and we have moments when we're clearly totally in the mud. You know? So both of those things are going on. At least that's in my experience.
I remember hearing you about a year ago talk about it's one thing to not like your life when things are bad and get motivated to do something, but it's a whole other thing to still experience a sense of dissatisfaction when everything's really good.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the label is. And I wasn't having that a year ago, and now I'm having it now.
Yeah, and I wouldn't put it quite that way. I would say that I would want to be disinterested in it being bad or good.
Okay.
But if I thought it were good, I might be dissatisfied with that thought because it's an indication that I'm not disinterested.
Well, I keep hearing, humanly, I keep saying, this is all good. Mm-hmm. And I keep hearing in my head, and that's not you either.
That's right.
Right.
That's the point. And as long as you like the good, you're going to have the bad.
Right.
Because you're buying, either you're buying the dualism or you're not. If you're thinking it's good, you're human, and you're in dualism.
Right.
And karma's going to happen and all that stuff. So they both have to drop. That list is love, hate, fear, desire. All those lists have to go to zero. And what happens is as you grow spiritually, you more and more get the sense of well-being. You more and more get the sense of all is well and everything is unfolding exactly as it should. And you therefore more and more can risk becoming disinterested in taking charge of your future, i.e. you can more and more trust the divine grace that we were talking about rather than feeling you have to be the doer. Right? As I experience grace in my life, I feel less urgency in taking care of myself. And the less I take care of myself, for these reasons, for the spiritual reasons, because I'm letting the experience of grace do that, the better it appears to happen. Because if I think I'm taking care of myself, then my experience will be the care of myself, the level of care that myself receives will be the one that's limited by my own abilities and limitations and lack of resources and everything like that. Whereas if I think that God's taking care of me, then my experience will be that I will be taken care of, limited by God's resources and abilities to carry rather than my own. So that's the difference.
So even when you say self-care, you better be big S self-care.
Big S. You're taking care of yourself.
I talk about self-care a lot. Yeah, that's a good...
Yeah, the way to take care of yourself is to go within. The only way to take care of yourself is to go within and open yourself out and let God flow out through you. And that will be, which is the supply, the basic supply truth. And that's the best way to take care of yourself, rather than setting out to resolve your dilemma, your problem. So let's be quiet. Ladies, pick up the purple sheets. That's the women's retreat in May. Living between two worlds. According to Dulcie. Thanks for coming. I love you all.